for joining us on Savvy Senior Sources, Talking with Experts. Let's take a moment and hear from our sponsors, GWG Life and Reverse Mortgages SIDAC.
What is the secondary market for life insurance? The secondary market for life insurance is an emerging financial market that provides individuals options with their policies. These options allow policyholders to benefit from the value of their life insurance. Policies are sometimes a financial burden, especially for seniors, as premiums often increase over time. The secondary market offers financial alternatives that can help policyholders benefit from their life insurance now.
Hi, I'm Beth Paterson, a certified reverse mortgage professional with Reverse Mortgages SIDAC. Bob's wife passed away, meaning his Social Security income was cut in half. His financial advisor suggested he look into a reverse mortgage. With the reverse mortgage, he was able to take a dream vacation with his nephew, and oh, the stories that they can share. After Bob passed away, his niece shared the difference that it made to the whole family. Dorothy did the reverse mortgage in order to protect her other retirement funds. With her line of credit, she was able to travel, buy a new car, and do home repairs. Years later, she's still benefiting from the reverse mortgage line of credit and not having to rely on her children. For more information on how you too can have security, independence, dignity, and control, contact us. Welcome to Savvy Senior Sources, Talking with Experts. Savvy Senior Sources guides your way through resources A to V for seniors, boomers, caregivers, and their advisors. In addition to the TV shows where we are introducing you to the experts, we publish a resource guide, the Savvy Senior Sources Guide. Please visit our website, savvyseniorsources.com, to find out information on how to get a copy of the guide, as well as find additional resources. I'm your host, Beth Paterson, with Savvy Senior Sources, as well as Reverse Mortgages SIDAC. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our sponsors, GWG Life and Reverse Mortgages SIDAC. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Marci Holley from Minneapolis Public Housing. Thanks for being here and co-hosting with me. And for our guest, which is Betsy Ward from GWG Life, and she is was a caregiver who left her job for taking care of your parents. And that's the topic of today's show, leaving the workplace to care for an aging parent. So welcome, glad to have you here.
Thank you.
The first question we're asking today is, there's a number of women in their 40s and 50s who are leaving the workplace, as you did, to care for an aging parent. Tell us about your experience with that.
I decided to make that decision because I was the only one of my siblings that wasn't married and caring for other people, so it made sense for me to do it. And I don't regret it at all. I would do it again. My mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness and my father had Alzheimer's, so I had to be his primary caregiver once my mother was gone.
It's a challenge.
Yes.
A big challenge.
This is not an uncommon story. About 1/3 of adults with parents over 65 have provided financial support to them.
Yeah, it was, as I said, an experience that I would do again. It gave me the time with my parents that I wouldn't have otherwise had, and I was also able to help them plan their final years.
Okay. And a little more on your experience. You were living in Florida and then moved back to Minnesota?
I moved back to Minnesota. I took a 6-year hiatus from my career, and during that time I wasn't working any full-time jobs, so it was a financial drain for me. Being that I work in finance, it didn't really make a lot of sense, but I had to do it. I wasn't earning enough money. I was just sustaining, but I wasn't saving. I wasn't contributing to a 401k. So it really was a sacrifice on my part, but again, I would do it again.
Yeah, important. But so, and it sounds like that you took care of your mom, and then your dad, you became the caregiver.
Right.
You took care of him at home?
I did for 3 years before we were forced to put him into an assisted living home, where he stayed for almost 3 years before his passing.
Okay.
What did that look like for you? I mean, 3 years at home with your dad.
I was working a part-time job, and I was working from 8 to 1, Monday through Thursday, but we had a caregiver come in as well that I hired to care for my dad during the hours that I was gone. My dad had a long-term care policy that we were able to use when he went into the facility, but until then we had no resources other than the wealth that he had built, which by the time he passed away was nearly gone.
Yeah.
And he had a long-term care insurance policy,
Right.
but it only covered in the home. So the policies now, my understanding is they
Much
do
different.
pay
Right.
for
Yeah.
home care and that type of thing. But that was the type of policy that he had
Right.
purchased.
It was
And
probably
so-
purchased in the 70s. So it was one that was only good for 2 years, and you had to be in a home. It was very restrictive compared to many of the policies today.
Okay. And did you have to come up with money out of your pocket in addition to that?
I didn't, fortunately. Well, my siblings and I all cared for my dad, or paid for my dad's health care at home, his home health care aid that came in while I was working. But as he was going through the nursing home care and we were watching his savings dwindle, it became very apparent that if he lived longer, it would have come out of our pockets.
Okay.
When he passed away, he had nearly spent everything. We had enough to pay for his funeral, and very little left over.
Which is a big impact on you and your
Right.
siblings. And specializing in reverse mortgages, I do talk to the families, and sometimes that's a suggestion is, well, get a loan from your siblings, or the family do different options. That's a challenge, though, because the stress that it can cause on siblings
Yes.
when maybe one can afford it and another one can't.
Right.
And that big picture comes into play, and so there could be some other options, and we'll
Right.
expand on those in a minute. And so, but let's go back to, how did your parents prepare for their older years as they
Right.
were aging?
I credit my dad to building a nice wealth for himself and my mother. They bought the long-term care policies, which did take care of some of his care, but not all. And in many cases, when an adult goes into an assisted living facility, they go in on private pay, and that's how they get there. And that is the place that they want to be, that they're comfortable with. In this case, my father was an architect. He actually built the facility that he went into.
Oh, interesting.
So he was
Wow.
familiar with it. But had he not been private pay, he wouldn't have been able to go into that facility. And ironically,
What do you mean about that?
because it was a private facility and they don't they don't take Medicaid and Medicare, it was for private pay only.
Okay,
Yeah.
so he needed to have the money in order to go there, and his choice was
Right.
to go to the place where he had
Yep.
built. It was
Yep.
kind of like home to him.
It was, yes. And the other thing that they did to prepare was my dad had a life insurance policy. Unfortunately, he allowed it to lapse as all of us children grew, and he didn't feel that there was a need for him to continue to pay the premium because we were all financially okay, and he let it lapse. Had he kept that policy and sold it on the secondary market, he could have taken the income from that sale and invested it and grown his wealth even more, or somehow paid for his long-term care as he was ailing. Or my mother, as she was ailing, she never went into a facility. She actually died at home. So we were lucky in that respect.
Yeah, that's where a lot of people do. So it seems like your parents were trying to plan and do the right thing, but as we often find out, that over time, it can be more expensive than what they
Right.
planned, especially our parents' age, that who knew, one, that they were going to live so long, who knew the prices were going to be so high.
Right.
And so there's a big gap in what they planned for and the actual cost.
Right.
And that. So talk about some other options. You hit a little bit on turning the life insurance policy into.
Right. When my father made the decision to let this policy lapse, the agent who sold it to him was unfortunately deceased, so he couldn't talk to that person about his options. And he called the insurance company instead, and they told him his options were, number one, a cash surrender, or number two, just stop paying the premiums and, you know, you no longer have insurance, you don't have to worry about the premium payments. Well, my father had, he had retired, so he was on a fixed income. And the answer for him was to stop paying the premiums. And they didn't really explain to him that there is a market out there where you can sell your life insurance policy like you do your home or your car or other securities. It's an asset. And he could have sold it for more than what the surrender value was. And as a matter of fact, the company I work for oftentimes buys those policies from the insured for 5 to 8 times more than what the surrender value is. And with that settlement, the cash settlement, they can either fund their retirement, they can pay for their long-term care. If they know that you know, they have a health issue and they're limited, take a vacation with their family and enjoy it.
What kind of life insurance policies qualify for this?
It's generally a UL. There are other types of
Life.
Yes, universal life. You can also do a term conversion and convert your term into a UL, and then go ahead and sell it out on the secondary market. And consider it as an asset, because had my father done that, we wouldn't have had to worry about paying for his final years and months in the retirement home, because literally we were down to one more month.
Yeah.
And did you have a plan?
Well, my siblings and I all talked about it, and you know, I wasn't working. I was working a part-time job, so I couldn't be included in that, which wasn't fair to my other 4 siblings.
But you were working. You were working at taking care of him.
Right.
Right, yeah. And another option to pay is the reverse mortgage if they're staying in their home, converting the equity in their home to have cash for whatever they need or want. And they can work in addition to the life settlement, so using both assets to expand in that. And you talked about the vacation. To me, specializing in reverse mortgages, a lot of times we hear, oh, but I want to leave something to my children. What's more important than spending the time with them and take them on the vacation? Those are much more memorable times to share with people and create those memories than the money. Or another option for either the life settlement or the reverse mortgage is creating cash to pay you a salary because you gave up your income to do, and you had 4 other siblings who were still working, and like you've said, you wouldn't trade it for anything. However, you know, it
did cost me.
It did, and it cost you for your future also. So taking the assets, the life insurance policy or the home equity, and turning that into cash to pay you a salary could have been another option.
And you know, Beth, a lot of people don't realize that those 2 assets, your home or your life insurance policy, can work for you even while you're still living and not have to worry about leaving it as a benefit to your heirs who might already be settled and okay. It really works for the insured or the homeowner's benefit.
Now, what if somebody says, you know what, I just got my life insurance policy. Like my mom, I think she just picked up an extra one when she was in her 60s. So, you know, it's not a lot of money. What would you say to a person that just had a very small life insurance? Would that be something that they could turn around?
It is. Obviously, it is something that you want to talk about with the beneficiaries. It is a very sensitive transaction, if you will. All parties are involved, the insured, the beneficiaries, the company transacting, buying that policy, and it's dealt with in a very sensitive manner because the beneficiaries have to sign off on it. So they are very aware that they are no longer going to benefit from this life insurance policy, but mom or dad just received a cash influx that they wouldn't have already had, which is going to help them in the long run.
Talk a little bit more about how your finances were impacted because you quit your job, your siblings were still working,
Right.
and your parents didn't do the life settlement or a reverse mortgage to help you pay you.
Right.
So how did that impact you then, and how is it impacting you now?
At the time, because I was only working a part-time job, I had no medical insurance. So, and I'm not young, so I was in my prime earning years, and I was only getting by. I was able to pay my car insurance and for my car, and some of my living expenses, which I was living with my dad, so I didn't have to pay rent or all of those items. But if you don't have that you're not able to do that, you need to plan for it as a caregiver. I was lucky. It did have a financial impact on me where I wasn't saving anything for my own retirement during those 6 years, those prime earning years. And so how did it impact me today? I'm not sure. But in 15 to 20 years, I will know.
It will be, that's what I'm thinking too, is that because you had that gap in there of not earning.
Not saving.
And putting money in a 401. And
Yeah, it'll be quite impactful. But again, I would do it over and over.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what about the relationship with your siblings? How did that...
Well, they were all happy for me to be able to do this. It was something that, nobody else had considered. Like I said, I was the only one that didn't care for other people. I didn't have children, so it made sense. But as things began to roll out and they realized that I had made a big sacrifice, I actually had to explain to them, do you understand what it meant for me to go from having this career to working a part-time job? To me, mentally, it was a big step down, and it took me a while to build back up.
And having no life. I mean,
Right.
you gave up a social life, you gave up so many things to care for your parents, which you wouldn't change for the world. But I think a lot of people don't understand what caregivers give up, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in my case, because I'm securities licensed, they went inactive for too long, so I had to retest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
was
I'm not
fun.
good at retesting, so bless you. And you're a caregiver now, too. You haven't given up your job, but talk a little bit about where you're at in some of that.
Well, first of all, thank goodness I work for a wonderful agency and have such supporting coworkers and everything. I was able to take a lot of time off to be with my mom. And it is still hard, it's hard. She's not driving, so I have to do a lot of the errands for her and all of that. And I wouldn't give up any minute I spend with her for the life of it. But I have a new respect for caregivers because honestly, I really don't believe people understand what go into it.
And what all is, and
The sacrifices.
you do. You sacrifice
There's a lot. Yeah, there is a lot underlying that people don't realize. And, specifically for caring for an adult with Alzheimer's, it is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's a challenge in a whole different aspect of things, and takes patience in caring. And both of my parents passed over 20 years ago. My mom had a stroke and had issues for 3 years where fortunately my dad was still alive and able to take care of her. They were in Indiana, I'm in Minnesota.
Right.
So I was making many trips down to help, and my mom was one who didn't want anybody else in the house, and
Right.
you know, limited to that. My dad had a hard time even going to the grocery store because he couldn't leave her alone.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many dimensions, and as we're talking as the children, I think our parents need to look at what, you know, in their planning and preparing,
Right.
what they need to be looking at potential options and how much we as caregivers, it impacts our lives
Yes.
too. And again, to say none of us would not do it,
Right.
but at the same time, it has to be a balance.
You really do need to reach out to your parents while they're living and help them make those plans, because it does include you. You know, it includes those adult children. And I know that my parents thought that they were ready. They thought they had everything lined up, but essentially they didn't.
No, because of it, and I hear that over and over again. I thought that my money was going to last, and then it doesn't. And a couple of the other shows were talking about the need for planning and starting early and start the conversations
Yes.
very early. And I've been on the Minnesota Own Your Future campaign or advisory panel, and I have worked at the state fair and surveying people on what their plans are, how they've planned for long-term care. And I remember distinctly one woman came with her daughter, and she said, "Oh, I'm just going to have my daughter take care of me." The daughter was still in high school.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, if something happens to you tomorrow, how is this? Have you discussed this
out.
with your daughter, and what's her plans, and what, you know? So you might want to start having that conversation
Right.
a little earlier than just waiting to the last minute to kind of plan. So, and then again, your parents were planning; they thought they had everything,
Right.
and
Yeah, and
when life happens, that's what I always say.
That's true.
When life happens, are you know?
Well, and even when somebody looks into long-term care or assisted living, and you're given that, well, it costs this much a month. Well, that's the basis. It doesn't include their medications. It doesn't include
the doctors.
a trip to the emergency room. And my dad actually lived in the unit that was right behind the hospital, and every time he went to the emergency room, they would literally take him by ambulance from one side of the building to the other, and it would cost us $1,000.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, you know,
And
we
there's
don't plan for that.
No. Yeah, let's see, my budget now includes for how many ambulance trips. And
Right.
But those need to be things that do need to be considered. And so our advice is plan and know options. And that's what we're trying to do with the show, is talk about different options. As the caregiver who did quit your job, a lot of people aren't in the position that they could do that, especially if they have children and or you know, their finances. And the other thing is, and I ask this to my clients all the time, what happens if life happens to your children? They get sick.
Right.
They lose a job, and if you're relying on them to help you. So what advice would you give?
You know, for things like that, the unexpected, the only thing that you can do is try to avoid it. Look at all of your assets if you can and see what could be there to help you through it. You know, you can't. There's so many people that their circumstances change on a regular basis, their job situation or what have you. And if you're going to be a caregiver, pre-plan it. If you're a single child, you know you're going to have to be there, be ready for it. It's happening to more and more people now than ever. So you really do have to prepare and look at your assets and see what your liabilities are going to be.
And have a family discussion
Yes.
with siblings.
Yes.
And because at some point, everybody, all of them could be the caregiver
Impacted.
also.
You have to
Yeah.
open up the lines of communication, because my parents always thought, my dad specifically, I built this wealth, and he really didn't let me or anybody else into his portfolio until it was too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's often the case.
Right.
So a couple planning, having the family discussions, knowing what assets are there.
Yes.
If there is a life insurance policy, if they want to stay in their home, and you know, using the reverse mortgage to do that, or using, and again, our sponsors, GWG Life does the life settlements, reverse mortgages side act, to use the home equity to help with those options. Know what the plans are, have that. The most important, I think, is having the discussion.
Right.
And with the family, you know, who could be the caregiver if necessary.
Yes.
And early on. So in closing, I'd like to again thank Betsy Ward, who is employed with GWG Life, for being our guest today and talking about the challenge of that caregiving and having to give up your role. And hats off to you for doing that. And then also to my co-host, Marci Holley from Minneapolis Public Housing, and who is also a caregiver, and discussing the challenges that we have faced. And don't forget to visit our website, savvyseniorsources.com, to find the resources that are selected. And last, thank you to our sponsors for making the show possible, GWG Life and Reverse Mortgages Side Act. Thank you.
Provide for your long-term care. Convert your life insurance towards payments for long-term care. If you are concerned about future health care, you can convert your life insurance to pay for home care or assisted living. Health problems can be stressful enough without the added burden of financial obligations. If you feel that you no longer need your life insurance policy, you may want to apply the value towards long-term care.
Hi, I'm Beth Paterson, a certified reverse mortgage professional with Reverse Mortgages Side Act. Mike and Carol decided that they needed a one-level home to fit their changing health needs. They used the reverse mortgage to purchase their new home instead of using conventional financing. This has benefited them greatly. Barbara decided to do a reverse mortgage to pay off her conventional loan that she was making monthly payments on. She had funds left in the line of credit after paying that off. And a year or so later, when she fell and broke her shoulder, she was able to tap those lines of credit to pay for her home care. As she said, she would have been up the creek without a paddle without the reverse mortgage. If you'd like information on how to receive security, independence, dignity, and control in your retirement years, contact us.